Welcome to this edition of the Talk of Simsbury. My name is Dominique Avery. Today's Talk of Simsbury is quite literally the talk of the town. In fact, it became the talk of the nation when NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams came to town on December 4th to do this story.
Finally tonight here, our Making a Difference report. This one involves a small town, a woman who lived there for many years, and a secret that turned out to be worth a fortune. Her story tonight from NBC's Harry Smith.
Simsbury, Connecticut is a classic New England town whose roots date back to the 1600s. When Kathleen Magowan, a long-retired first-grade teacher here, died a couple of years ago, she was remembered fondly.
She loved the little kids, and that was where she really put her energies because she built a foundation for them, for their education, for the rest of their lives.
Tara Donahue-Willerup serves on the Simsbury Board of Ed.
She was all about giving, not getting. She just cared and loved what she did.
Single all her life, Magowan lives simply with her twin brother Bob in the house their parents left them. But no one in Simsbury knew that Kathleen Magowan had a secret, a very big secret. Turns out, Magowan was a millionaire several times over, and when she died, most of that money went to the institutions she loved.
Today, we're going to talk about Kathleen Magowan, Simsbury's secret millionaire, and her recent amazing gifts to various town organizations, which just recently came to light. Joining me for this discussion are attorneys Lou George and David Bondanza. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having me.
They both, they're from the Simsbury law firm Hassett and George, who handled her estate. I wanted to start out with both of you talking a little bit about the fact that this is a feel-good story, and as I mentioned, it's been the talk of Simsbury and the talk of the nation. I heard that it was even in the Los Angeles Times. But one thing that people want to know is, how did the publicity come about? I know I saw a story in the Hartford Courant on the 24th that a local resident, Chris Keating, wrote. So tell me, how did people learn about this?
It really started with a story before that, and the Farmington Valley Press had done an article regarding the gift to the Board of Education. And that's how it started. Yes.
Oh.
And that's how it started. And then Chris, I believe, had picked it up, having seen that, thought it was an interesting story and wanted to do a little more with it.
So it started locally, actually.
Yes,
It was
absolutely.
a big story for the Farmington Valley Times.
Absolutely.
So when did you first, either one of you, come in contact with Kathleen, and how did this whole thing develop? Did you meet with her first? David, did you meet with her?
Originally, she was a longstanding client of the firm. Sometime thereafter, she came in with the neighbors to help her with her affairs, have someone help with her finances and things like that as she was aging. At that time, Dave met with her and the neighbors, and Dave, you can take it from there.
Yeah, we met and we set up a plan in conjunction with probate court so that the neighbors could help handle her bills and her finances. She had, wanted somebody to be able to basically pay her bills on her behalf, and with the oversight of probate, they gave a conservatorship so that her affairs could be managed. At the same time, she wanted to ensure when she passed, what was going to happen to her finances and all the money that she had accumulated during her life.
So before we talk about her money, maybe you could just, either one of you, give a little bio on her. I read the obituary. I know that she was born in New York, but she moved.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Kathleen was born in New York. She was a twin. Her brother Robert also lived in the area here. Robert and Kathleen were two of three children from Mr. and Mrs. Magowan. The older sister, who was also pretty well known, she went to college up in Western New York and became one of the first medical doctors that had graduated from the school as a woman. She moved out of the area, and she had three children of her own. Now, Robert and Kathleen, neither one of them ever married or never had any children. The parents, when she was born, lived in New York, as I said. They then moved up to Alaska, and they worked for the Guggenheims. And he was into accounting and bookkeeping. From Alaska, they moved down to Bolivia, and they stayed in Bolivia for quite some time. And then he came up to Simsbury here, and he was working for Ensign Bickford, and he worked his way up the ladder, and he became the CFO of Ensign Bickford.
That's interesting because I saw that they lived in an Ensign Bickford house, and I was wondering what the connection was. First, I thought that Kathleen or her brother did, but it was the father.
It was the father and the mother, yeah. And she stayed there, and she eventually inherited the house, and she lived there basically most of her adult life. She became one of the she was in the first graduating class for the St. Joseph's College of Nursing, and she received a BS degree in 1947, I believe it was. And she went to work for St. Francis Hospital in the pediatric unit. She apparently didn't like nursing very much, and she went back to school and got her degree in education. And she came out to Simsbury School District and started working in the elementary school as a teacher.
So I read that she worked, she taught at Central,
Yes.
She taught at Squadron Line and at Belden, which is now the town hall.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So she's a fairly interesting lady, actually.
Yes, I think she lived an interesting and a very full life, and was able to follow the aspirations that she had, and it was all about children and kids.
So nursing didn't agree with her, but she did like teaching. Right?
She did like teaching. She worked with the kids, in pediatric nursing. I'm not a nurse, but I don't know why she switched, but she did stay with working with kids.
So she had a lot of attachment, though, to Simsbury institutions, clearly.
Sure, in terms of the church and
McLean.
Right. Exactly,
So,
and Visiting Nurse Association.
Right.
And those were a lot of the organizations that fulfilled her life and what she used to do, and she ultimately wanted to repay them.
It's funny. She must have known a lot of people because this story has been going around town and people have been talking about it. And I talked to one person who knew somebody who worked as a visiting nurse in the house before the brother died. Mm-hmm. And they mentioned that, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, that the brother lived upstairs and she lived downstairs, and he still wanted her to cook for him. She said, "No, I'm down here. You take care of yourself up there." She was pretty feisty. So,
yes, she was.
Yeah.
And she was a very warm and sincere individual. And the brother had moved back in. He originally had been over in the Manchester area, and he moved back into the house, basically for the economy and to be able to take care of each other.
So now, when the neighbors first came to you, had he already died? Had Robert already died?
No, in fact, when they first came to us, she wanted to update her estate plan, and have the neighbors able to to help handle her affairs.
So how did you actually discover that? Or tell me, because you said this on television the other day, how much did she think she had when she came to you?
Well, she understood that she had investments. She didn't really concern herself. It wasn't a priority for her to really worry about those. She looked at what she had as the amount that she would live off of on a normal basis, what she had in a savings account. And she thought, told Dave, it was approximately $40,000. As attorneys, when people come in and they want someone to update their wills or have someone help them with the finances, part of what we do, our due diligence, is to gather the information. and really determine what's there. And as Dave asked her for documents and looking at different things, it became apparent very soon that it certainly wasn't $40,000, that more like $4 million at that point, that we could easily see.
Okay, so you're asking her, Dave, for documents, and she's bringing things in. What was going through your mind? What were you excited? Were you nervous? How did you feel?
Well, it's people have differing amounts of assets in their lives. Here's a woman that comes in, and she's a modest, humble woman who is the neighbor next door. And she's got a folder, and I'm doing the math, and there's $4 million worth of assets in there. And it's a little bewildering. And you're wondering, how does a school teacher in the elementary school building teaching first graders accumulate $4 million? And, as it turns out, the brother, Robert the brother, was a finance employee at the Prudential. And he set up parallel accounts, and what he did for himself, he did for her, and they did pretty well for themselves. And so, the story goes is she's accumulated a lot of the money. There are wealthy people in the area. You typically see them differently, though. They drive the Cadillac Escalade. They live in the house that's not on Hot Meadow Street. But not Kathleen. She drove a regular General Motors Buick. She lived in the house there for a long time.
So was this, do you think, a philosophical decision on her part to live that way, or was it just never occurred to her that they had more money, or her brother either? He didn't also, or I don't know, did he live lavishly when he lived in Manchester?
No. I think the biggest thing that they did as a brother, sister, or family, they would travel. And I think they developed that desire to travel from their family, having traveled numerous times. And there are a number of pictures that we could see of them flying in the older planes to different areas. So I think traveling was something that they both did. Other than traveling, I think she lived a modest life and did not need to worry about every dollar and how this investment is doing and can I maximize it to buy this particular item. She didn't think like that at all.
What was the neighbor's reaction?
The neighbors were also pretty surprised, that here she is, again, the woman next door. And I help take out her garbage, I help her shovel her path because she lives alone. And then they come to realize that, she has quite a sum of money.
And they didn't really even realize that until after she had passed away,
right.
Only recently, which was an interesting event for us, and probably the most fulfilling was letting different people and organizations know what she was passing on.
Okay, so tell me about, she died a year ago, August
2011.
2 years ago.
2 years ago, 2011. Okay, so after she died, you had a sense before she died how much she had, right?
Yes.
You knew all of that.
In planning, we knew approximately, and then time went on, so things even appreciated more than that.
So did David come to you in the middle of this and say, this is kind of overwhelming? Did he consult with you?
Oh, we collaborate on a lot of these, but yes, it was unique. Even at that time, it was unique. And then after she had passed, we were accumulating all of the assets and trying to organize everything. And that's where every now and again, as we were doing this, there was a further discovery. And what was it? $4 million at one point accumulated to approximately $6 million by the end of it. And there were discoveries of savings bonds, war bonds, that had face values of nothing extravagant, $2,500. I'm sorry, $25,
sure.
$50, $100. And if you looked at them, you wouldn't have thought they were of great significance.
And in those days, though, they still accumulate. They continue to accumulate interest.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. So Dave downloaded a program that calculated, using the registration numbers, calculated, and at that point he came to me, and that was one of the nerve-wracking parts where he came in, and he said, these are approximately $183,000. I think we better put these away because they're bearer bond. They're
Right. Anybody who has them
exactly,
can turn them in. Yeah.
Exactly.
So there were little discoveries like that that came right up until the end. Dave, you can tell the story of the last part that we found.
We were working on a final accounting for the probate court to close the estate, and I noticed that there was a $600 check entry that had been done. Actually, I think it was earlier this year. And I in conjunction with working with the paralegal, I called the paralegal and I said to her, "Where's the $600 from?" And she pulled up the record and she says, "Well, it's a check from Prudential." And I said, "Well, any Prudential investment that the brother had made and in her name and what have you had been sold already." And so I says, "Well, we'll have to look into this." So I picked up the phone and I called Prudential. I got a hold of their stock transfer agent. And they said, "Well, there's an account here in her name that's got about 1,600 shares of stock in it." And at the time, it was worth about $80,000. Now, this account hadn't been on any lists. There are no records of this account. Nobody knew anything about this account. And the way we had gotten the check was because I had, at the post office, I had done a forwarding address for any mail that was coming in for her name. So we got the check. So we enlisted our broker that was working with us on the account, and he took possession of the stock certificate. He converted it, and then we sort of monitored the stock for a little bit. And a couple months later, we sold it for about $120,000 to maximize the value for the estate.
There's a lesson in there about the importance of record keeping.
Yes, there is.
She was actually, I would say, pretty good at keeping track of items and organizationally. She had everything.
She did.
She did, for the most part. That was one, and I don't know how that, whether
Slipped
the brother
by her.
had that,
Slipped off the radar.
brother might have had that one, and just somehow that was not one that was in any of her records.
I don't know if there's too many people that, with that kind of money, could manage it themselves, no matter how organized they are. Because you get to a point where you're so organized, you're disorganized.
Right.
And without some professional money management, which I think she had in the brother.
Mm-hmm.
But once he had passed a year earlier. Once he passed, she was sort of on her own at that point as far as money management goes. So.
And she must have been a little bit overwhelmed at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And she realized it, and that's ultimately why they came in, to have someone help her with her finances and her affairs. And as David said, that when she came in at that particular time, she also had a plan of making sure that whatever money she had was going to go to the people that touched her in her life.
So let's talk a little bit about that. That was the thing that you just said was the most pleasurable for you, was to tell people. So tell me about how that happened, who you called, who got what, and the sort of the emotions. How did people feel, and how did you feel calling them up? How did that play out?
I guess the one word would be surprised. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the organizations receive gifts, and some more substantial.
Well, how did you notify them? Did you send them a letter in the mail?
No, mostly by telephone. Mm-hmm. Some of the tangential ones received a letter, but mostly by telephone. And then we met with people as well. And when we first would explain it to someone, they were shocked. They knew her, they knew of her, they knew what kind of character she had, and she was a good person, but they didn't understand or have any knowledge that she would be leaving a gift of this amount with the gravity.
Okay, so who were the people who, we know that the Simsbury school system got, how much did they get? 'Cause I think I put it.
The school system was approximately 480,000.
No, 500.
Right around 480 or thereabouts.
Somewhere around
somewhere
there.
in
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Right, 480.
Yeah, 40.
Yeah.
Yep.
So did you call the superintendent? Did you call the?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and we and explained it to them, and then he explained to the board, their board as well. And in fact, that's.
Did you
gonna
go
be
speak to the board?
I spoke to members of the board,
Okay.
and we are going on Tuesday night, I believe. The Board of Selectmen is going to accept the gift
For the
town.
for the town.
Right, right. So that's going to happen on
On
Tuesday
Tuesday
night.
Oh, interesting.
And then others we called, met with the church.
So St. Mary's, she made a donation to them of substantial donation?
Yes, yes. I like to leave it to the beneficiaries to discuss the amounts. The Board of Ed is obviously a public.
Right, it's public, right.
So I'd like to leave it to
Okay.
them. But the organizations that she dealt with within the community or helped her along the way, like McLean's, she was involved with Visiting Nurse Association.
I read that she participated in the water exercise there, which
Yes.
is something I do.
Right. Exactly. So those were the organizations and educational places where she went to school, and then there were individuals, and some of the more fulfilling time was calling an individual, asking them to come in. Kathleen had left them a gift, which didn't seem like a very big deal, but then when they left our office, they were very taken back, surprised, shocked.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you out of the goodness of your heart are helping an elderly neighbor, you're doing it not, well, especially if they're living modestly, you have
Exactly.
nothing in mind except to help them.
Right.
And then, I mean, really is a feel-good story for those people who expected nothing
Right.
and did it out of the goodness of their heart.
Right.
There's no question about that they were doing it just out of the goodness of their heart. And that's something Kathleen never forgot, even to some that had moved away some time ago.
So I talked briefly to Matt Curtis, who's the superintendent of schools, and I said, what are you going to do with the money? He said that they really have no idea. They want it to be something to honor her and to remember her, but also to be useful and helpful. But I guess they're going to have a bit of a struggle to figure out exactly what would be appropriate.
It's a good struggle.
A good struggle.
It is. It's a good place for them to be.
So,
and on that, our goal with this is merely to have Kathleen's legacy live on, and that's all we can do in terms of handling her affairs at this point, and that's our hope, that these gifts go in a direction that leave a legacy of what Kathleen Magowan did, because she was not the type of person that would have promoted that on her own.
But she did. She was organized enough to come to you without knowing how much it was, with a modest amount of money, $40,000.
Right.
She said, I want to make sure that people get it. Did her family benefit, the family of her sisters?
There were distant relatives that did receive some of this, but the large majority were to charities.
Very interesting.
Yeah. When she came in to do the list, she was very definite about it. She had a notebook piece of paper that she had sat down and wrote out, all the charities that she had enjoyed and she thought of that is where she wanted her money to go. I mean, it was a very specific plan that she had come up with on her own.
So, what was your impression of her? I mean, how did you feel?
I didn't understand it at first. When she initially gave me the list, to me it looked like a random smattering of charities that we hear about on TV. She would. I visited her a couple times when she was in McLean, and she asked me to take care of her, and she sort of became endearing, like an old aunt or grandmother. And when I sat down and I started working on the estate, the light bulb turned on, and I looked at it, and you could follow her life and understand why the charities were who they were, and it was basically everyone that she had interacted with, or had really helped her along the way. And some of the phone calls that that I had made to contact the individual charities, they would make a comment. There was a prediction that she would leave us money. She used to write us a $10 check every year. Mm-hmm. And that was obviously before they knew the amount. Right. And then when I would divulge the amount, there was dead silence on the phone. You could hear crickets in the background, and they were overwhelmed with the news that they were receiving that kind of money.
Well, it must have made you feel good. So we've just about run out of time, and sort of in the last remaining minute, I wanted to ask each of you to sum up what lessons you learned from Kathleen Magowan's life. I mean, it has to have been a big deal for both of you. And so what did you take from this experience with this very generous and lovely woman?
Well, it's certainly a touching story, and clearly a good story and a good lesson where people help others, and sometimes they are ultimately rewarded, and there are very good people out there in this world that still remember who's helped them along the way and attempt to pay them back in any way they can. And at the beginning, it was a small amount. What turned out to be an enormous legacy. It didn't start out that way. So that transition was very interesting, and the number of people that she reached out to and touched. It actually touched people within our office, paralegals and attorneys, and both of us.
That they're good people.
Yes.
It is a feel-good story, isn't it?
That it is, yes. Yeah. I personally began to appreciate that life isn't all about material items or in cash, and this was a woman who lived a full life. She was happy. She used to walk the halls over at McLean's with a smile on her face and not a care to the world.
Well, thank you both for joining us. We have run out of time now, and I'd like to thank everyone here at SCTV, especially our volunteer director, Althea Graney, and our volunteer camera people, Sally Suma and Gail Westenfeld, and of course the office for getting the volunteers together to help us get on the air. And thanks especially to my guests to join us, who have joined us today, Lou George and David Bondanza, and for coming so promptly. This has really been an interesting story. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you missed any part of the show, you can always watch it on our website at simsburytv.org, where you can also find our schedule. Or for updates on what's new, catch up with us on Twitter or like us on Facebook.
You're watching Simsbury Community Television. Your town, your schools, your government.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.